Paul Adom-Otchere is a leading public affairs analyst and a broadcast journalist from Accra. Well, Paul, I do know that when Nigeria and Ghana play football, there's a lot of attention and passion. But what kind of interest is Nigeria's election generating where you are in Ghana?
Well, yeah, indeed, you're right about football. There's a lot of interest also in the Nigerian election, basically because Ghana and Nigeria have had some similarities in the past. And the similarities have been such that things that happen in Nigeria, historically, some of it happens in Ghana as well. We can go back to, say, 1965, when the first military coup occurred in Nigeria, and by 1966, the second military coup had occurred in Ghana. We can forward it to 1979, when Shegun Shagari was elected president of Nigeria. And a personality in Ghana cast in the mold of Shehu, and the person of Dr. Hilal Leman was also elected president in Ghana. We can fast forward up until the new Nigerian Republic, where unfortunately President Shehu Musa Yar'Adua passed, and a year later or so, the president of Ghana, Professor J.E. Mills, may he rest in peace, also passed. In those circumstances, the Nigerian constitution, which permitted vice presidents to inherit the president's unexpired term and then later contest for his own elections, occurred in Nigeria. Goodluck Jonathan was elected, and in Ghana as well, President now incumbent John Mahama was elected. And in this current election, you have General Buhari, who is challenging for the presidency. And in Ghana's election next year, there would be the candidate of the opposition, about the same age as General Buhari, also challenging for the presidency. So a lot of these historical similarities have given historians and the political scientists a great interest in what happened in Nigeria. Apart from that, there are also the economic ties that have grown significantly over the last 10 years or so, where a lot of Nigerians interest in Ghana, and there's a lot of Ghanaians who also do business and build their businesses with the Nigerian market. And many Nigerian banks are represented in Ghana these days, and the collaboration is extensive. So yes, Ghanaians are particularly interested, and all the news bulletins of today have led on the Nigerian story in terms of how your electoral commission is working, and in terms of how your biometric equipment is working. We had an experience with biometric in 2012, and we're going to have an experience with it again next year. So
let me even jump in, Paul. Let me bring in a question in that regard about the biometrics. We introduced the card today here. I mean, it has been used in Ghana for the elections. What kind of challenges did you face? Because while it was being introduced here, there were so many comments about it. Some thought that we should have allowed a lot of room for tests before introducing it for the big one, the presidential elections. And then when it was eventually introduced, there were hitches here and there, which many have described in different ways. But what kind of challenges did you face, and how was it handled?
Well, some of the challenges that we faced with the biometric eventually ended up in the Supreme Court, in which you would know that the last election in Ghana was challenged by the losing candidate in the Supreme Court in a matter that dragged for about 8 months until a court verdict was given endorsing the Electoral Commission's announcement of President Mahama as a eventual winner. The problems were similar to yours, the lack of verification, people could not be identified. The controversial one with ours was that during the election period, the incumbent president urged the Electoral Commission to ignore the use of the equipment where it was not working and to allow people to vote manually. Now, this generated significant confusion and also controversy that eventually was settled by the court in terms of the argument that the plaintiffs of that matter sent to the court. What happened, though, is that Ghana is looking again at how to apply this biometric verification equipment. Again, in Ghana, similar to yours, the voting had to be extended to the next day. There were so many undertones to that in terms of people speculate and the conspiracy theorists indicating that the postponement was going to be in favor of one candidate or the other. Well, we are yet to see how yours turns out, but a not so pleasant experience with the hitches that the equipment brought about, and also the postponement of voting extending into a second day of voting for the first time in the history of this country.
All right. Paul, let me quickly ask you, from what you have talked about regarding the card readers and the way the elections have gone, I know in Ghana, I guess earlier in March, there was some form of elections. And Africa, especially as a continent, will be very busy with elections. Almost 20 countries in Africa will be holding elections this year. Do you think that the rest of Africa should be considering these card readers, considering on how it worked for your country and Nigeria?
Well, that's an interesting question. We think that they have been put in place because of what we knew in Ghana historically to be multiple voting by particular individuals, and also impersonation at the vote. Because the African borders are the way they are, some of our borders straddle the same tribe, so that across Ghana to La Côte d'Ivoire, you have the same tribe, speak the same language. Some of them are in Ghana, some of them are in La Côte d'Ivoire. Across Ghana to Togo, for instance, you have the same tribe, they speak the same language, some in Togo, some in Ghana. So there was a concern that people who are not members of geographic Ghana will come in to exercise their franchise in favor of a particular group of people. So this equipment was introduced to be able to check some of those things that have been a part and parcel of our historical election. Yes, so that's why it was introduced. But when it came in Ghana at that time, it did. The fact that it wasn't working properly, its technology, it can fail, and the fact that it had to take voting to another day, and it created a certain uneven process in terms of when voting starts and when voting ends. And legally, that's particularly important. The timing of voting and the rules that govern the voting must be the same across the country. So voting starts at 6 o'clock in Ghana and ends at 5 p.m. Because of the introduction of the biometric verification and the hitches thereof, in the last election, it wasn't the same for every area, and I see that happened in Nigeria also. So you don't have a uniform process of voting in terms of the timing. That's important for the process, for the transparency of the process, the sanctity of the process. The regulation must be the same. It starts at this time, ends at this time in all of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. If you don't have that,
let me chip in there, if you'll just permit me. Let me just ask you this. Have you had, in Ghana, suggestions of a second option, considering the fact that your biometrics also failed you?
Well, the Supreme Court recommended substitutes and alternatives. That the Electoral Commission must come up with alternatives ahead of the process to say that where the verification does not work, ABC will occur. And the court was worried that there were no alternatives put in place in the 2012 election. So what is happening in Ghana right now is that in preparation for next year's election, some of these suggestions are being taken from stakeholders to make a determination as to what the reasonable alternatives should be. That where the verification does not work, there should be clear alternatives even before the voting occurs, so that people know ahead of time that this is what will happen, and then they can check that process.
All right. Paul, tell us quickly, does it look like the continent of Africa has gotten to that point, sophistication in our electoral process, such that science should prevail?
Well, I get a sense of asking whether Africa is ready for that, for this kind of technological process. Is that your question?
I didn't get that, Paul. Oh, I meant to say that the use of integration of technology into our electoral process, do you think that the continent has gotten to that point where we can conveniently say, because of integrity issues, we must allow technology to play a major role?
Well, I think, yes, we should. We would have gotten to that point by now. Ghana crossed the bridge last time with hitches. Nigeria is crossing the bridge now with some hitches that we have observed. The head of the INEC is suggesting that just 25 or 0.5% or so of the equipment did not work. Yeah, that's also similar to the case in Ghana. But in the areas where they did not work, those areas appear to be the stronghold of particular candidates. That's where the concern would be, so that you cannot attribute a deliberate conspiratorial process to that. If it doesn't work, why is it not working in a particular candidate stronghold? in Ghana, that's what happened, and we hope that in Nigeria that doesn't happen. But this Nigerian election is important for the person that you're asking. If Nigeria is able to cross this bridge and have an election that has a semblance of significant 70 to 80% integrity, that will be the leader in Africa. I mean, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. Now is Africa's biggest economy in Sub-Sahara, and probably Africa's most shining country with the potential to rewrite the African story. So this event, and that's why everyone is interested in what happened in Nigeria yesterday and today, and Ghana is particularly interested in it, because this is what can rewrite the African story of electoral integrity, the African story of democracy, the African story of economic development. It's all about Nigeria. If Nigeria doesn't work, then we're all in trouble. So we're really hoping that it does. And from what we're seeing on Channel TV in Ghana so far,
Paul, let me just interject there for a minute or two, if you can just
maybe on course for
hear
something
me.
significant.
Okay, Paul, let me just rub minds with you for just a short while. My thoughts is that this might take a long process for the whole of Africa. What's yours? When you talk about these technologies that Africa can adopt to have a clearer, more credible elections in the next decade that we're looking at, won't this be a long-drawn, too much of a long-drawn process?
Well, no, I think that we should be there. I think that we should be able to do it, except that, as the Ghanaian Supreme Court has said, let's go with the verification because it gives the process integrity. But let's have alternative ideas to where and when it does not work, so that we can have a uniform system. I'm not so sure whether the Kenyans used it in the election that elected Uhuru Kenyatta, but that election appears to be credible. South Africa has usually had credible elections, and so it can work. Yes, it should work. But yes, there have to be alternatives so that we know before we go in that if it goes and it's not verifiable, then this and that should happen. Maybe two people should identify the person and say that yes, we know him, he's who he says he is, and therefore he can vote. Or three people. We have to have a creative way of making the process work.
All right, thank you so much. If you can quickly just briefly tell us, what are the lessons that you would say that as a journalist, as a country, Ghana, a neighboring country, have learned from the Nigerian 2015 elections?
Say that again, sir.
I said, I mean, what are the lessons do you think that any other person would say they've learned from the Nigerian 2015 elections, this concluded voting process?
Well, this particular election, I think that from a media perspective, what we can learn is that patience that the Nigerians have exhibited, and also the regular briefing from the Electoral Commission in Abuja has been very impressive, and especially also the extensive media coverage. And I'm not so sure if Nigeria has had this kind of media coverage of an election in the way that you've done it over the last 2 days or so, and in the way that you did the pre-election process. So yes, we can learn from the transparency that the Electoral Commissioner appears to be exhibiting with his regular media briefings. I hear he's now announced that at 8 o'clock Nigerian time he's going to speak again, and that's quite impressive. So there's a lot of transparency, and the media coverage is very good.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Paul, Adom, thank you very much indeed for speaking with us today.